Ever notice how someone who once took you for granted suddenly acts different when they feel like they might lose you? That anxious energy, it's real, and it's often the wake-up call they never expected. But instead of waiting around hoping they change, what if you knew exactly what to do when they finally realize their mistakes? When someone who once overlooked your value suddenly starts to realize their mistakes, it's easy to get pulled back in emotionally. The sudden attention, the apologies, the intensity, it can feel like validation, especially if you spent weeks or months questioning your worth, wondering if they'd ever notice what they lost. And then, suddenly, they do. But here's where the real work begins, not in what they're doing, but in how you respond. The first thing you need to do is stay grounded. When they're feeling anxious and panicked about losing you, their behavior often becomes frantic. They might send long messages, call unexpectedly, or show up with words like, "I miss you," or "I made a huge mistake." Their energy is different now. They're not cool, distant, or detached anymore. They're invested, or at least it seems like it. But anxiety is not the same as clarity. Their emotional state doesn't mean they've come to a mature realization. It means they're uncomfortable. They're reacting to the possibility of loss, not necessarily reflecting on their behavior. And that difference is everything. This is the moment when many people give their power away. They hear the emotion in his voice, see the anxiety in his messages, and suddenly feel responsible for soothing it. They think, maybe he really means it this time. Maybe he's changed. And while those may be valid thoughts, you have to remember what your role is in this moment. It's not to manage his anxiety. It's to manage your standards. Staying grounded means not jumping at the first sign of regret. It means resisting the urge to go back just because he finally feels what you felt for so long. You might feel the temptation to answer every call, to meet up, just to talk, to give him the reassurance that he's not actually losing you. But if you do that, you're not giving him a chance to fully feel the weight of his actions. You're not allowing him to sit in the discomfort that often leads to real change. You're simply providing emotional comfort in a moment when accountability is what's needed most. When you stay grounded, you give yourself time to observe, time to breathe, time to reconnect with your own clarity, because your emotions might get stirred up too. His anxiety might trigger old feelings of connection or hope. You might want to believe everything he says because a part of you still loves him or still wants to believe in the potential of what you had. But love without boundaries leads to cycles. And if you're not grounded, you'll fall right back into the emotional rhythm that led to the breakup in the first place. This doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you operate from composure, not reaction. It means you give yourself space to reflect on whether his anxiety is accompanied by real insight, real change, or just fear of being alone. Because here's the truth. People will often mistake anxiety for love. But anxiety is self-focused. It's about what they are afraid to lose. Love, real love, is about seeing you clearly, respecting your needs, and showing up consistently, not just when panic sets in. Staying grounded allows you to see the situation clearly without being swept away by emotion. It gives you a sense of emotional control when everything feels heightened. It helps you avoid saying things in the heat of the moment, making promises you can't keep, or offering reassurance when what's really needed is reflection. And it puts the focus back on you, not in a selfish way, but in a self-respecting way. You're not punishing him by holding back. You're protecting your peace while you assess what's real and what's reactive. When someone who hurt you or took you for granted suddenly comes back into your life in an anxious state, it's easy to get swept away by their words. The apologies sound sincere. The promises seem heartfelt. There's a desperate urgency in their voice, and for a moment, it feels like the emotional breakthrough you were waiting for. You might hear things like, "I've changed," "I finally understand what I did," or "I can't lose you." These moments can be overwhelming, especially if a part of you has been hoping they'd wake up and see what they lost. But the truth is, words, especially emotional ones, are cheap when someone is scared. They come quickly, and they often come from a place of needing relief, not from true understanding. That's why it's critical, in these moments, to focus not on what he says, but on what he consistently does. People in a state of anxiety often say exactly what they think you want to hear. That's not manipulation in the evil sense, it's just human nature. When someone is afraid, their instinct is to patch things up as fast as possible. They're not thinking long term, they're thinking, how can I fix this right now? And that mindset leads to grand statements, sweeping emotional confessions, and sudden declarations of love. But those things don't always come from a place of deep reflection. Sometimes they're just panic wearing the mask of clarity, and panic doesn't build anything stable. What builds trust, what builds a second chance that's actually worth taking, is behavior. Repeated, calm, consistent behavior over time. When someone realizes their mistake and they're truly serious about making things right, they won't just say it, they'll show it. They'll show up differently. They'll take responsibility without needing to be praised for it. They'll listen instead of just trying to talk their way out of guilt. They won't try to rush your forgiveness or ask you to forget what happened overnight. They'll understand that regaining your trust isn't about how they feel in the moment. It's about how they act every day going forward. But here's the part that trips people up. That kind of consistency isn't visible in the first few days or even weeks after someone realizes they've messed up. It takes time to see whether this is a real shift or just a reaction to fear. And that's why you have to observe. You have to resist the urge to emotionally reward someone just because they're now giving you what you wanted before. Because if all they've done is talk and you've already opened the door wide again, there's no reason for them to actually follow through with change. Real growth in a relationship starts when someone is willing to do the hard emotional work without immediate payoff. It starts when they continue to show up, even when you're not meeting them with open arms. When someone is truly serious, they'll be patient. They'll let you take the time you need. They'll demonstrate change in the small things, the boring things, the unglamorous parts of life, like how they handle frustration, how they communicate under stress, how they take feedback, how they respect your space. That's where the truth lies. Not in the romantic gestures or emotional apologies, but in the daily choices they make when the spotlight isn't on. Observing someone's actions allows you to separate who they are from who they say they are. It helps you avoid being drawn into a cycle where they mess up, panic, apologize, and you forgive, only for the same problems to surface again later. Because apologies are easy when someone is anxious. What matters is whether they make different choices when that anxiety passes, whether they keep showing up the right way even when they no longer feel like they're about to lose you. That's when you'll see who they really are and whether this is something worth reopening your heart for. When someone comes back into your life after realizing they've made a mistake, especially when that realization is fueled by anxiety, it can feel like a rush of emotion for both of you. Suddenly, the person who was once distant, dismissive, or unavailable is now calling, texting, and pouring out their feelings. They're saying all the things you wish they would have said before. They want to talk, to explain, to reconnect. In these moments, it's tempting to want to bridge the gap quickly, to smooth things over, and to fall back into old patterns of comfort. But this is exactly the moment when emotional boundaries become crucial. Setting clear emotional boundaries isn't about punishing someone. It's about protecting your clarity and your peace while allowing space for growth, both for them and for you. When someone is anxious and trying to pull you back in, they might not have the awareness or maturity to understand how much space you actually need. Their instinct is often to close the emotional distance as quickly as possible. They might ask to talk things out right away, to meet up, to go back to how things were, or to be reassured that you still care. And if you're not careful, you might feel like it's your job to make them feel better, to ease their discomfort. But here's the truth. Emotional boundaries exist so that you don't abandon yourself in the process of making someone else feel safe. It's not your job to regulate their emotions. It's your job to stay connected to your truth, to what you need, and to not compromise your healing just because someone is finally feeling what you felt. Setting a boundary could look like telling them you're not ready to talk yet, even if they're desperate for a conversation. It might mean saying no to a meetup even when they're pleading for one more chance. It could mean letting their messages sit unread for a while so you can think clearly without pressure. These actions might feel harsh in the moment, especially if you still care about them, but they're not about cruelty, they're about clarity. because without emotional boundaries, you can't distinguish between their desire to fix things and your actual desire to re-engage. You'll be pulled back in by their energy before you've had the chance to reconnect with your own. And that's where regret happens. When you say yes to something your heart isn't ready for, just because you didn't have the space to fully feel your no. Another thing to understand about emotional boundaries is that they create accountability. When someone is truly sorry, when someone really wants to earn back trust, they'll respect your space. They'll honor your need for time. They won't try to bulldoze through your boundaries in the name of love. They'll show they've grown by how they handle your hesitation, not by how passionately they argue for a second chance. If they can't sit with the discomfort of not being let back in immediately, that says something about where they're really at. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are filters that let the right behavior in. It's also important to remember that emotional boundaries aren't just about how often you talk or how much time you give. They're about emotional access. Does this person get to know your inner world again right away? Do they get to hear your vulnerable thoughts? Do they get to be comforted by you while you're still trying to rebuild your own strength? Boundaries help you protect your emotional resources. Because even if their anxiety looks like love, it doesn't mean it's your job to be their emotional caretaker. Your healing, your needs, your space, they come first, not because you don't care, but because you've learned to care about yourself just as much as you once cared about them. When someone who once dismissed your value begins to feel anxious about losing you, their energy shifts. Suddenly they're reaching out, expressing regret, making promises, and telling you how much they miss you. For a moment, it might feel like justice, like finally they see what you were worth all along. But this moment is also incredibly dangerous, not because of what they're doing, but because of what you might be tempted to forget. Their panic can be intoxicating. It can feel like a long overdue recognition of your value. And it's easy to let that wave of attention and apology cloud your judgment. But this is exactly when you need to hold your focus on something far more important than their emotional reaction. You need to come back to your own standards. Your standards are the framework that defines the kind of relationship you want and the kind of love you're willing to accept. They are the non-negotiables that protect your well-being, self-respect, and emotional clarity. And during a breakup or emotional separation, especially one where you've grown and done the inner work, those standards often become sharper. You begin to see what you tolerated, what you settled for, and what you never want to experience again. But when someone starts chasing you out of anxiety, there's a real risk that you begin lowering those standards, not because you've changed your mind, but because you're caught in the emotion of the moment. You start making emotional decisions based on their intensity instead of your clarity. Their anxiety can create pressure. They might want answers fast. They might say they can't sleep, can't think, can't move on without you. That urgency might make you feel responsible for their emotional stability, or it might awaken the part of you that still wants to believe in the potential of what you had. But potential doesn't build a healthy relationship. Standards do. You don't want someone who shows up in a panic. You want someone who shows up consistently. And that difference only becomes clear when you hold firm to what you've learned you need and deserve. This doesn't mean you close yourself off completely. It doesn't mean you never give someone a second chance. It means that before you even consider re-engaging, you look at what's being offered and ask, does this meet the standard I've set for myself? Is this person now showing the maturity, the consistency, the respect, the emotional intelligence that I know I need to feel safe and valued in a relationship? Are they taking responsibility for their behavior without shifting blame, making excuses, or rushing me for a decision? Your standards aren't about being difficult or demanding. They're about protecting the person you've become, because it took strength to walk away, to heal, and to rebuild. It took awareness to see what wasn't working, and going back to something that doesn't meet your standard just because someone is suddenly afraid of losing you is like throwing away all the work you've done the moment someone else decides to finally show up. Sometimes people mistake standards for punishment. They think you're being cold or unforgiving, but real standards aren't about keeping someone out. They're about protecting the quality of what comes in. They're a filter. They make it clear that love isn't enough if it's not paired with action, growth, and accountability. When you hold firm to your standards, you communicate that you're not interested in emotional performances. You're interested in patterns, in behavior, in evidence. You're not here to be impressed by emotional desperation. You're here to be met where you've already grown. And if someone wants to step back into your life, it won't be their anxiety that earns them that place. It will be whether their effort consistently aligns with the person you've become in their absence. When someone who once dismissed your presence suddenly realizes the weight of your absence, especially when that realization is driven by anxiety, the emotional pull can be overwhelming. They may come rushing back, saying all the right things, making you feel seen in ways they never did before, and offering what seems like a brand new version of themselves. It's natural to feel tempted in those moments, to feel hopeful, maybe even flattered. But the emotional chaos they bring shouldn't be the compass you use to make a decision. You need to decide from a place of strength, not from loneliness. Because there's a massive difference between going back to someone because you truly believe there's a new foundation to build on and going back because you're craving the comfort of familiarity. Loneliness distorts clarity. It makes the past look warmer than it was, the memories sweeter than they felt, and the person better than they showed themselves to be. When you're lonely, your emotional lens starts to filter out the disappointment and highlights the affection. You begin to remember how they made you laugh, how safe their arms once felt, how exciting it was when things were good. What fades, though, is how often you felt unseen, unheard, or emotionally depleted. Loneliness is deceptive because it tricks you into thinking what you miss is the person, when in reality, what you're missing is the emotional connection, the feeling of closeness, the companionship. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake that emotional hunger as a sign that you're meant to return, when all it's doing is pointing to a temporary emptiness that needs to be healed internally, not filled externally. Strength, on the other hand, comes from presence. It comes from remembering why you walked away in the first place. It comes from honoring the journey you've taken to rebuild yourself, to reconnect with your self-worth, to find peace without their presence. Making a decision from strength doesn't mean you don't miss them. It doesn't mean you're immune to their charm or their remorse. It just means you've learned to measure someone's value not by how loudly they claim to love you when they're scared, but by how they treated you when they thought you'd never leave. Strength looks like pausing before responding. Strength looks like reflecting before deciding. Strength looks like asking yourself what future you want and whether this person is capable of contributing to it, not just emotionally, but practically, consistently, and maturely. It's in your strength that you'll notice red flags more clearly. It's in your strength that you'll see whether their change is genuine or just reactive. Because people who are driven by anxiety are often sincere in the moment. But sincerity doesn't always equal transformation. You'll know you're operating from strength when your decision is based on what serves your growth, not just what soothes your heartache. When your standards remain intact, even in the face of emotional intensity. When you don't let the fear of being alone push you into something you know doesn't fully honor who you are now. Choosing from strength also means being willing to walk away again if what they offer doesn't meet your truth. It means knowing that your peace is worth more than temporary emotional relief. It means trusting that the version of you who did the work to heal is wiser, stronger, and more capable of making a clear decision than the version of you who once felt desperate for their validation. This is not about being guarded or closed off. It's about being aligned. It's about choosing from a place where your mind and heart are working together, where your emotions aren't running the show, and where your vision for your life leads the way. Strength allows you to choose a future based not on who is chasing you now, but on who consistently shows up when the chase is over.